There are few stories as heart-wrenching and complex as those of the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II. In today's video, we're exploring an era marked by both darkness and light, exploring the complexities of humanity under the pressures of war. Our journey will take us through military conduct, cultural influences, and the undefeatable spirit of a nation, as we try to understand the inhumane alongside the humane. This story is a lesson of human nature and the challenges of ethics during times of conflict. It's a tale of sorrow and darkness, filled with moments of honor and cultural richness that shaped a nation and its people. But before we begin, it's important to remember that the Japan of World War II is not the Japan we know today. The actions of some do not define the many, and it's not right to cast a shadow over an entire nation based on the deeds of a few. Within any military force, there are varied individuals with different values and behaviors. Some members of the Japanese Imperial Army upheld principles of dignity and respect towards others, even in the face of challenges. No side in a conflict is completely immune to committing inhumane acts. However, the distinction lies in the scale and the systemic nature of such cruel acts. Of course, there were some clear contrasts between the Japanese forces and the Allied armies. These differences were rooted in the cultural, institutional, and ethical frameworks that guided their conduct in warfare. Understanding these differences is crucial to understanding the full scale of the conflict and the behaviors it created on both sides. The Allied forces benefited from a diverse command structure that integrated perspectives from multiple nations. They greatly valued discipline while operating within the bounds of established laws of war. Leadership within the Allied ranks was key in promoting respect for human rights and lawful conduct among troops. This approach was supported by a belief in the importance of ethical warfare, with military leaders across the United States, Britain, and other nations supporting the commitment to international laws and conventions. However, the Japanese military leadership was greatly influenced by the nation's samurai heritage and the concept of Bushido, which we'll talk about a little more later. This cultural backdrop created an environment where orders were followed without question, often leading to extreme measures on the battlefield that prioritized honor and sacrifice above all. On the international stage, the Allies tried to uphold agreements such as the Geneva Convention, which set the standards for humanitarian treatment in war. Of course, the Allies weren't without their own failings. However, they generally sought to investigate and prosecute war crimes committed by their personnel. This was part of their broader commitment to accountability and the rule of law. In contrast, while Japan was a signatory to the Geneva Conventions and other international agreements, its commitment to these norms was often overshadowed by a deadly mix of nationalistic and militaristic ideologies. This led to wartime actions that, at times, were very different from international norms. These actions were driven by a belief that national interest and the emperor's will could justify changes from global agreements. Additionally, the composition of the Allied forces was also important. Their forces were drawn from a wide mix of nations with diverse cultures, languages, and military traditions. This introduced a level of variety to their approach in warfare. This diversity, from the leadership down to the rank and file, created a range of perspectives in strategy and decision-making, potentially moderating conduct on the battlefield. It gave them a broad spectrum of ethical and tactical approaches that influenced their conduct during the war. However, the Japanese military's more unified cultural and institutional framework emphasized conformity and unity under the imperial banner. This meant that questioning orders or expressing disagreement was not just discouraged, but often severely punished. Soldiers were expected to execute commands without hesitation, a practice that sometimes led to actions that were very different from Allied operations. There were also the beliefs of the army's members themselves. The Imperial Japanese Army is a good example of just how cultural beliefs and societal norms of the time can shape actions that are remembered throughout history. At the heart of the Imperial Japanese ideology was the idea of stubborn loyalty to the emperor and the nation. This principle, known as Shintaisei, was a deep cultural belief that was part of every aspect of life. Soldiers were brainwashed with the belief that surrender was an incomprehensible shame, a dishonor not only to themselves but their families and the emperor they swore to protect. Japan's socio-political landscape in the early to mid-20th century further increased this idea. The soldiers were not just fighting for territory, they were participating in a mission they believed was divinely ordered. the doctrine of Hakko Ichiu, translating to 8 corners of the world under one roof, suggested Japan's destiny was to bring the world under its benevolent rule. This belief in divine right fueled ambitions and justified actions taken in pursuit of this goal. Propaganda played a crucial role in shaping the mindset of the Imperial Japanese Army. The enemy transformed from a simple opponent on the battlefield to become a direct threat to the Japanese way of life. They portrayed Allied forces as barbaric invaders intent on destroying Japan, which contributed to a strong sense of hatred and fear. Soldiers were led to believe that their enemies would commit unspeakable atrocities against their families, forcing them to adopt a view that justified inhumane treatment in return. It was a cycle of dehumanization, where the enemy was not fellow humans but subhuman creatures unworthy of compassion or humane treatment. There was also the legacy of the samurai and the Bushido code. Although they weren't universally adopted in their traditional forms by the Imperial Japanese Army, they still left their mark on military ethos. Bushido, the way of the warrior, emphasized traits like loyalty, honor, and sacrifice. Originally, these were noble ideas, but as part of the Japanese Imperial Army, they became part of a militaristic framework that celebrated death over dishonor. The moral code that celebrated martyrdom and absolute devotion to one's lord was transformed into an order for unquestioning loyalty to the emperor and the nation. Soldiers felt compelled to prove their loyalty through extreme measures, often leading to acts of brutality driven by a perceived need to honor the Bushido spirit under the extreme conditions of war. The harsh realities of wartime also put immense pressure on the soldiers. The intense physical, emotional, and mental stresses faced over extended periods could push anyone to their breaking point. For some, this manifested in acts of extreme violence against apparent enemies, while others chose the path of suicide to escape the dishonor of capture or defeat. This was a symbol of a culture under siege, where the lines between survival, honor, and brutality were blurred. Of course, not everything about the Japanese Imperial Army was terrible. The army has a cultural legacy that has a deep and positive impact on the world. This legacy, rooted in centuries of tradition, continues to influence modern society in subtle and deep ways. From the disciplined practices of martial arts to the serene beauty of traditional arts, the cultural contributions of Imperial Japan are an example of a society that valued excellence, discipline, and a strong connection to aesthetic and spiritual pursuits. The Imperial period was a time of great innovation for traditional Japanese arts. The tea ceremony, known as Chanoyu or Seido, evolved into a sophisticated art form that celebrated principles of harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. This ritual of preparing and serving tea has surpassed its origins to become a symbol of Japanese culture and philosophy worldwide. Similarly, Ikebana, the art of flower arranging, is not just about creating pleasing aesthetics, but also about expressing the delicate balance and harmony of nature. These practices come from Zen Buddhism and emphasize mindfulness and the beauty of the present moment. Then there's the performing arts, No and Kabuki theater, with their elaborate costumes, stylized performances, and intricate stories, continue to captivate audiences both in Japan and internationally. These art forms emerged and were refined during the Imperial era. They offer a window into the social values, myths, and historical narratives of Japan. The legacy of the samurai also plays a crucial role in shaping modern Japanese culture. The samurai were bearers of a rich tradition that included martial arts, philosophy, and Bushido, the code of honor that we talked about before. This code has found new expressions in contemporary practices such as Kendo, the way of the sword, and Judo, the gentle way. These martial arts are now practiced worldwide, promoting physical fitness, mental discipline, and spiritual growth. The Japanese pursuit of perfection, or Kodawari, is another part of the cultural heritage that has had a lasting impact. This concept can be traced back to the careful craftsmanship of the Edo period. It's clear in everything from traditional crafts to modern Japanese products. Japanese craftsmanship is world famous for its attention to detail, quality, and reliability. But this dedication to excellence is not just with physical products, it's a philosophy that supports many aspects of Japanese life, including cuisine, architecture, and technology. The idea of Kaizen, which translates to continuous improvement, is a modern version of Japan's cultural emphasis on discipline and perfection. Developed in the post-World War II years, Kaizen has been crucial in Japan's economic and industrial recovery. Today, many organizations worldwide have adopted it as a strategy for growth and efficiency. It's clear that the Imperial Japanese Army went on a path that led to some of the most controversial moments in modern history. However, it's important to recognize that within this narrative, there were individuals who, even in the darkest times, upheld principles of honor and humanity. The actions of the Imperial Japanese Army, while distinct in their context and execution, are part of a broader human story. The commitment to discipline, the pursuit of perfection, and the deep sense of loyalty that characterize the Japanese military ethos are part of the larger human endeavor to find meaning and purpose in the face of challenges. The story of the Japanese Imperial Army gives us a roadmap for facing the challenges of the present and the uncertainties of the future, with the hope that we may choose a path that leads towards peace, understanding, and shared humanity.